Okay, good morning, theology class. I hope you're enjoying your Friday so far. Remember that I said that we don't have to watch this video if you're going to be on the Zoom here later, depending on when you watch this video. So just a quick update that what you see in front of you here on the screen is the description of the assignment that's due today. So read the last 4 pages in Erickson chapter 26 or 27, whichever chapter we're on, I think 27. And then you have these 3 questions to answer, and I'm going to briefly touch on those. But first, I wanted to read a Valley of Vision prayer as we get started, and then we'll jump in and it'll just be some quick review. So this is on page 160, if you want to follow along, called Faith, page 160. So you need to pause me to turn there. Go for it. This is what the author writes. My God, I bless thee that thou hast given me the eye of faith, to see thee as Father, to know thee as covenant God, to experience thy love planted in me. For faith is the grace of union, by which I spell out my entitlement to thee. Faith casts my anchor upward, where I trust in thee, and engage thee to be my Lord. Be pleased to live and move within me, breathing in my prayers, inhabiting my praises, speaking in my words, moving in my actions, living in my life, causing me to grow in grace. Thy bounteous goodness has helped me believe, but my faith is weak and wavering, its light dim, its steps tottering, its increase slow, its backslidings frequent. It should scale the heavens, but lies groveling in the dust. Lord, fan this divine spark into glowing flame. When faith sleeps, my heart becomes an unclean thing, the fount of every loathsome desire, the cage of unclean lusts, all fluttering to escape, the nauseous tree of deadly fruit, the open wayside of earthly tares. Lord, awake faith to put forth its strength until all heaven fills my soul and all impurity is cast out. Okay, so that was our encouraging Valley of Vision prayer. Now, I'm going to just briefly touch on what we will hopefully talk about here in person on our Zoom. So these were the 5 views of the atonement. I'm going to keep these brief because I already made a video yesterday about them. So, first view that we have is the one that is hardest to say, the Socinian view. And the Socinian view, if you remember, basically says this: Jesus is our example, which is true, but incomplete, right? Jesus is our example. Okay, second view of atonement is the moral influence. Okay, moral influence. And this one basically just says Jesus shows God's love. Again, that's true, but it's incomplete because there's no response of belief from our side. It's only, we understand God's love and now we're saved, but just by being aware of his love. So it's true that we do see God's love in Jesus dying, but it's not true that we just have to be aware of that and then we're saved. Okay, then the third one is called the governmental view. Governmental, if I can spell that. The governmental theory, and that is basically that God is the judge. And Jesus' death pays for us, and so then God can uphold his judgment. He can be the righteous court, and all of heaven is still fine because God does not remove his justice. He just does the courtroom scene. Jesus takes our place. Boom, that's the end of the story. Very transaction-oriented. Okay, then we have the ransom theory. This one's really interesting because it involves a payment to Satan. So this one is basically saying Jesus defeats Satan. Defeats Satan's power by giving up his soul to Satan, but then he defeats Satan by rising again. So this focus is on the aspect that we belong to Satan when we're sinful, but then Jesus offers himself to buy us back from Satan. Satan takes the deal, but then loses because Jesus rises again. Okay, so that's the ransom theory. Sorry, I put the ransom theology. Ransom theory. Then the last one, which I think most of you will like the most, is the satisfaction theory. And in that theory, it's pretty much the language that you've heard your whole life growing up in Sunday school. And that is that we've sinned against God, and Jesus takes our place. It's part of the governmental view, right? He takes our place, he pays our debt, and he does what we could not do, and then we have to respond in faith. Okay? So, in your homework, you have to write which one you like the most, which one you like the least, and why you like one the least, why you like one the most. So just explain that. We'll talk about these. So hopefully, if you watched this before, we're going to talk about these different views, but this is just kind of a quick recap. Erickson goes into a lot more detail, which we'll probably talk about some and get some good discussion in class. Okay, one final thing, and this is Erickson's whole point of why he even brings this up, and I really like this. He says, because each one presents an element of truth. Okay, so from the first one, what is the first element of truth? From that Socinian view, we see that Jesus is our example. That's true. Jesus is our example. In the cross and in his suffering, we see that he is an example, and he's our example. That's right, absolutely. And when we look at the cross, we should see that and see how much he was willing to suffer and then take that to our own lives. Then number two, we have that Jesus demonstrates God's love. And that's absolutely true, because in the cross we see God's love demonstrated through Jesus, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Absolutely a true statement, and something that we should look at when we look at the atonement. Then number three is about the government. We have to understand the seriousness of sin, right? That it took Jesus dying, and took him dying for the sin of all mankind. And this view is saying this should scare us, because sin is so serious. This is what God does to sinners, and so it makes us not want to sin, because we see what happened to Jesus, and then we don't want to sin. So that is true. Sin is very serious, and it does require death. It takes only blood can forgive sin, and so Jesus' blood is what is forgiving us. So we should be reminded of that when we look at the cross, is seeing it's the death and the pain is what our sin has deserved. Then number four, the ransom theory. Guess what? Jesus did triumph, if I can actually even spell this, triumphed over sin and death and Satan. Sin and death and Satan and the powers of hell, right? Jesus has triumphed. I don't know that, as I'm sure many of you say, we wouldn't say that Jesus had to pay Satan in order to have us, but he definitely triumphed over Satan, and he triumphed over sin and death. And so that's something we should be reminded of when we look at the cross, because it doesn't end at the cross. Jesus rises again. And then the last one is the idea of satisfaction, right? Jesus rendered satisfaction to the Father for us. So all of those are true, and each one of these comes from a view that you may disagree with. 4 out of 5 of these views, and yeah, I hope that you realize that there's truth in every single one of them. The question is, and what we're going to talk about tomorrow in person, is which one of these is most scriptural. And the reality is we don't have to just believe one, right? We should believe, actually, the truth that's in each one, especially the truth in each one that comes directly from Scripture. Like the verse clearly says that Jesus triumphed over sin and Satan. Yeah, we need to believe that, even if we would disagree with the idea that Satan had our souls and God had to pay for them. Okay, so hope that makes sense. We'll kind of talk about that in person tomorrow. Okay, we'll also have a funny video. Also, bring your dog, stuffed animal, whatever you're going to bring it to the Zoom. Okay, Mr. H is over now.